Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 99. We're going to be talking about some news topics to start the episode, talk of a weird RTX 5050 9GB model, new APUs, some Nvidia driver struggles that have come up within the last week. And then we're going to have a big discussion and chat about future-proofing. Jay's 2 Cents released a video where he... Well, yes, potential drama. No, hopefully not. Now, basically, Jay released a video talking about why future-proofing is no longer possible in his opinion. I think we have a very different opinion about future-proofing with current PC gaming hardware, so we're going to be getting into all of that. So let's get into it. We'll kick off this week's episode with a bit of news topics that I've come across the last couple of weeks. The first one I saw today was very bizarre rumor that I saw posted on video cards via Mega Size GPU on X/Twitter about the GeForce RTX 5050 of all products getting a refresh apparently with 9 gigabytes of VRAM. So apparently, at least the tweet says, new product RTX 5050 9 gigabyte with GDDR7 96-bit. Basically, as Nvidia knows they can give you a 5050 or 5060 at 128-bit with 12 gigabytes with the new 3 gigabyte GDDR7 dies. But instead, apparently, they're going with a 5050 9 gigabyte. So, first of all, what are they doing? What is this product? The 5050 doesn't even use G7, does it? I thought it was a G6 product.
Yes, it's a G6 product on a... Well, the current version uses G6 on a 128-bit wide memory bus for a bandwidth of 320 gigabytes per second. So this would be a downgrade in terms of bandwidth, presumably.
I think it's as... the G7 modules are like 28 gigabits per second instead of 20. So potentially that's enough to slightly offset the reduction in memory bus width. It might be similar or slightly higher.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think if I run the numbers, it's something like 5% higher, maybe bandwidth from the 9 gigabyte option. But yes, it would be a switch over from G6 to G7 and then an increase by 1 whole gigabyte. Yes, let's celebrate. We're getting slightly more VRAM on an entry-level GPU. But I would guess this would be called probably the same thing because they have NVIDIA's refreshed products in the past like this, changed the memory, and they've ended up getting the same name. So hopefully they don't do that.
Performance should be about the same with an extra gigabyte of VRAM. So, hey, we're getting more VRAM, Tim. It's not an 8 gigabyte card.
What's the point? Like, why are they making this product, at least, and this is all based on rumors, right? Like, we don't actually know for sure that this product is coming, but why would they bother making this product instead of giving, say, the 5060 12 gigabytes of memory? I would have thought that going from 8 gigabytes of G6 to 9 gigabytes of G7 would be at least a little bit more costly. Like, I know memory is expensive today, but that's with the new 3 gigabyte chips and everything, that's got to be a pricey proposition. But doing that on a 5050...
Yeah, well, I'm only hearing about this rumor now, so I'm trying to wrap my head around it in real time. I didn't actually have time to look at this one. I don't know if they had like binned, because in the article here they say it's GB206 silicon, but it would be GB207, right? Yeah, it must be. I think it's a typo because they say the 5050 is GB206. Whereas it's GB207 because it's different physical silicon to the 50. So that's a typo, right?
Yeah, GB206 is used for the RTX 5060 and the 5060 Ti. Okay. So the GB207 die is used for the 5050. So yeah, I would be assuming that
it's the same die.
Yeah, in this video cards table, they've got the 5060 Ti listed as using GB205. And the 5060 using GB206. So
there's a few mistakes there.
A few mistakes in that table. But yes, the 5050 is GB207. And to get it down to 96-bit, they would have to cut. So I'm not even sure about this CUDA core count. 2560, that would have to be reduced as well, I would think.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one. Like I said, I'm trying to wrap my head around it in real time. I don't know if there's just binned dies that they couldn't, they didn't want to go down to, because I think historically they'd probably bin that part down to have like 6 gigabytes of VRAM, let's say, something like that.
Whereas they did that with the 3050, didn't they?
Yeah, where that wouldn't really fly anymore. So they had to go with the increased density to get, which results in a 9 gigabyte capacity. So that just it seems like that's what they were doing rather than going or reducing the VRAM capacity for those binned parts. They've just increased it with the higher density chips. That would have to be my guess. But yeah, I don't know. Not sure, Tim.
Yeah, and I just had a look at the RTX 3050. They did reduce the CUDA core count from 2560 to 2304 when they made the 6 gigabyte model instead of the 8 gig model. Again, that was a 96-bit memory bus configuration. Back then when they did it, I think you reviewed it and said it was awful. So there was that aspect to it. But yeah, I mean, this would be the first of these desktop parts to use the 3 gigabyte modules, as far as I'm aware. The rest of them used the standard 2 gigabyte modules. It's a pretty weird, would be a pretty weird deployment, in my opinion, to use those modules for the first time on such a low end GPU. I think it would make a lot more sense to beef up the 8 gigabyte models, give the 5050 12 gigabytes, don't cut down the 128 bit, and the 5060, just a straight 12 gig model of that would make a lot more sense. Is this a thing where they've sort of maybe ordered some of this memory already? Like they ordered a bunch of 3 gigabyte modules, let's say, and they're not making the Super Series, or that's been delayed or something. So they've got these chips to be put somewhere. And so they're like, well, what can we do with them? And I guess maybe this is the least financial suicide or something. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something going on and I haven't been able to figure it out just yet. I'd have to sit and have a think about it. But yeah, surface level analysis, I can't make any sense of it. So your guess is as good as mine on this one.
We also saw this week that AMD has sort of slid out, I guess, with pretty much no fanfare, new desktop APUs for the
APUs.
AM5 platform.
Hang on a minute, Tim. You're telling me there's new APUs and we're not dedicating the podcast to just that news?
We are dedicating 2 to 3 whole minutes on these new exciting APU products because boy, am I excited about the Ryzen AI7 450G and the Ryzen AI5 440G, which are just some of the, well, actually, they're 2 of the 3 options that AMD is now providing. So these are not the first APUs on AM5. We did get the, was it the 7000 or 8000 G series a little while ago?
Yeah, we got the I think we covered those parts. I think
you did review them. Yeah.
I think the 8700G and the 8600G we might have dedicated content to, and I think we skipped the 85 and like the 8300G. I don't know.
It's so boring that we can't even remember whether we actually made content on it. Essentially, those were Zen 4 APUs. They were using the Phoenix die. So you got your 8 Zen 4 CPU cores, 12 compute units of, I think it was RDNA 3 on those parts. And then obviously not as much L3 cache and that sort of thing. The whole monolithic die that we've come to love from APUs. This new series that has been released, first of all, they are for OEMs only. So you're not going to be able to go to Newegg or whatever and just buy a Ryzen AI7 450G off the shelf, but they do use a different die. So it's not a refresh of the Phoenix parts. It is using the new mobile silicon, but instead just repurposed for the desktop. So CPU cores upgraded to Zen 5, and then the GPU as well has been upgraded to RDNA 3.5. So not RDNA 4, but sort of that intermediary step that they've been using for mobile parts. So the flagship chip, the AI7 450G, 8 CPU cores, 16 meg of L3 cache, and then the Radeon 860M GPU, which is 8 compute units, clocked at 3.1 gigahertz. So OEM only, they launched on March 2nd. I wouldn't be expecting too much fanfare about those. But what is interesting is that they haven't deployed all of the Gorgon Point, which is the APU die that they're using. They haven't deployed all of those chips for desktop just yet. So in the mobile line, there's also the Ryzen AI 9 series that has up to 12 cores and up to 16 compute units, so basically double the GPU size. No word on that coming to desktop just yet. So maybe they'll release that later for people, but these seem to be just, I guess, for office PCs, that sort of thing. You can make a cheap motherboard, slot in one APU, don't have to put a GPU in there as well, and then away you go. But
I mean, you can do that with the normal parts though, Tim.
That is true. You can, can't you? They have GPUs in them now, so I guess it's if you want slightly more performance on that.
Yeah, it's. I don't know.
It doesn't make a lot of sense in that sense, does it?
They have AI in the name.
That's it. That's it. We've solved it.
Mm-hmm.
You can now buy an AI CPU for your AM5, I guess, mini PC or office PC or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All good.
Mm-hmm.
Solved. The other thing I wanted to chat about before we get into our main topic this week.
You didn't ask me if I had anything to add to that one, Tim.
No. There's nothing to add there. I don't need to get your opinion. It's an APU. I was just updating people on the status of APUs. There's nothing interesting to talk about there whatsoever.
Okay.
They're making them. That's that.
I mean, at the right price, they could be interesting products, but they're always just priced to the point where they just don't make sense, which is what we've always said. Like,
yeah, I mean, we know they're not going to be priced like if it was a box CPU. There's no way that like the 450 or whatever, the AI 450 is going to be like great value. There's just no way that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. So, people always get sort of they feel personally attacked when we crap on these products because they're like, well, they're low end gaming solutions, but they're not. Like, they don't make sense for low end gaming. They're not feasible. You're much better off splitting those things up, which we've proven time and time again. Maybe given the current state of things, but then, I mean, you've got to pair these with DDR5 memory. So I guess end of discussion there. Let's just move on, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, the APU angle or the GPU angle with the other Ryzen processors, they only have an RDNA 2 GPU with 2 compute units. That's very,
useless.
Very basic, just
it's a Windows
Microsoft Word.
Yeah, it's a Windows iGPU. That's it. These could game.
I don't think they'll be in any these are not going to be deployed in gaming systems. I wouldn't have thought.
No.
If they're OEM only, we're looking at mini PCs, pro models, that sort of thing, commercial desktops or whatever AMD labels them as. So the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get to our main topic is this current status of NVIDIA's drivers, which I think has been pretty strange over the last couple of weeks, or at least the last week. NVIDIA has bizarrely released 3 drivers within quite a short succession because of different issues that have cropped up with each of these drivers. So last week on February 26th, so about the time we recorded last week's podcast, they released the new 595.59 driver. This was primarily, I think, for Resident Evil Requiem, the new game that everyone wanted to play, but it introduced some issues with fan reporting and fan spin-up, I guess. So people were sort of advising not to install that driver because it had problems. Then on March 2nd, NVIDIA released another driver, 595.71, which fixed those original problems with the fan spin and that sort of thing, but introduced a bizarre voltage cap, which limited clock speeds for some models. And then just today, I believe, they have finally fixed both of those problems in the new 595.76 driver. So that is the driver that people should be using now after 2 revisions, which is pretty unusual for NVIDIA to release or have to fix issues like that so quickly. The other issue that we saw was in Resident Evil Requiem. If you're using an RTX 40 series GPU, that performance when using maximum settings was quite a lot lower than expected, and that could be fixed by reverting back to a driver from several revisions ago, well before the 595 branch. That has also been fixed via a profile update. So not a driver update. I think they pushed an over-the-air profile update, which fixed 40 series performance in that game. So a bit of a mess there from NVIDIA GPUs. A bit of a mess on the drivers there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The only thought I have is I wonder if this is linked to MSI's Lightning GPU with the unlocked BIOSes and the leaked, extreme overclocking BIOS that
interesting.
ended up online and is available through, I think, various torrent sites. Didn't hear that from me, but MSI did their best to scrub that from the internet because I'm sure that went down a treat with NVIDIA. So I'm wondering if those BIOSes that remove limits that historically NVIDIA has very closely safeguarded, and those BIOSes can be flashed to other, say, 5090s, for example. They don't just work on the Lightning. They work on a huge range of other brands' 5090s. And based on the reporting I saw, the performance hit was most noticeable on models that did have increased voltage or people who were overclocking and using like the voltage slider and MSI Afterburner. We're seeing quite large drop-offs in performance. So I'm wondering if at the driver level, NVIDIA was trying to sort of lock things down a bit more for potentially future releases, and just sort of trying to mitigate those BIOSes that leaked out, let's say.
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle I sort of haven't thought about. But yeah, once the BIOS has been leaked, that means that anyone can install it on their GPU, at least 5090, right? So
Yep.
there would be an increased risk of idiots blowing up their 5090s.
Well, that's not what I was saying, but
I mean, but that's the way that Nvidia would be thinking of this, right? Is like some idiot is going to download this BIOS. They're going to be tinkering away. They're just thinking, oh, I'm just going to install this on my system and try out some overclocking when it's not really designed for sort of casual overclockers, blow it up. So I guess there is a potential that if they can do a bit more on the driver side to prevent people from doing that, then that's going to prevent RMAs that Nvidia then has to deal with.
I was thinking more about giving people who do BIOS modding and tinkering, provide them with access that they previously didn't have, that they could possibly apply to other future BIOSes, or just other BIOSes that are out there. Because once you sort of let the genie out of the box on that one, it can people know what's going on. So I'm not sure, and I thought maybe they were just trying to mitigate that by locking it down at the driver level, that sort of heads off any of that becoming a problem in the future. Not sure. That's
it's
just
it's a reason. It's a reason that makes sense.
That's all I've got. So that's all I can really think of.
Well, at the very least now, while there was that weaker sort of weird driver issues, both of these problems are fixed. This has been reported by users as well. So seen some user reports saying, I was having the voltage issues, the voltage cap previously. Now that's been resolved with this driver update. And then with the additional Resident Evil stuff that they've fixed, I think they've largely been able to resolve all of these problems within a week. It's pretty unusual. I mean, hotfix drivers are not unusual after driver releases, but to have two of them released pretty close is, I would say, unusual. But again, it's not like this is having any sort of lasting impact. I know people are sort of coming up with theories that this is related to maybe Nvidia using AI as part of the driver development. I don't think I've seen any hard evidence of that. This is just people wanting to make fun of Nvidia for using AI. I'm not sure. I think we've seen hotfix drivers before, so I don't really associate those two things necessarily, but I think your reasoning makes a bit more sense there.
Yeah, well, reporting issues and fan spin issues, that's like just something Nvidia likes to circle back to once every 6 months or so. It's how often have we heard about those particular issues? It's such a regular occurrence now that I expect we'll have a BIOS in another 6 months or so that causes some kind of stop start or fan spin issue. It just seems for some reason that one just crops up on a regular basis.
Yeah, same with like games every once in a while having like a specific GPU or specific GPU series has day one performance issues that they just need to resolve via some sort of hotfix. That's happened before as well.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable though. Like, a lot of games, a lot of GPUs, that you can sweep under the rug as no big deal. Like, you're going to have those teething issues and stuff with new games, as long as they address it pretty quickly. No big deal.
That's right. And I think it only affected the path tracing mode in that game, which on a lot of 40 series GPUs is you're probably not going to be using that mode anyway. Really an issue largely for the 4090 owners out there. But again, like that's now been resolved. And it was interesting to see that Nvidia can resolve these things without a driver update. So while they did release driver updates, that was actually done via a separate profile update system. So no driver update, they just pushed that out and fixed it for people. So interesting that they could do that, but they can. This week's main topic, I think we want to talk a little bit about future-proofing because we recently saw a video from Jay's 2 cents where he was sort of talking about future-proofing as being dead in PC gaming, in his opinion. So he talked about a variety of different reasons why he thought that future-proofing is not a thing at the moment and won't be a thing going forwards. But I'm not sure that we agree with all of his points that he made in the video. Some of the things maybe, some of the things less so. So do you want to kick us off and sort of talk about some of the things that he was saying in his video and whether or not you agree with them?
Yeah, well, I thought this might be a good one to discuss just on the podcast because this is a good format to discuss these types of things. And because it was circulating the Harbour Unbox Discord quite a bit over the last few days, people talking about different angles of the video and their opinions on it. And they were largely asking for our opinion on it. So I thought, well, we could do that here.
And sign up to Patreon, get access to our Discord chat. Well,
Yep.
why not plug that in the middle here? Anyway, continue.
Yep, because it might lead to a podcast episode on it. So yeah, as you said, the entire video was about future-proofing, I guess, insinuating that it was once a thing you could achieve, but now it is no longer a thing you can achieve because of, he goes through a whole heap of different reasons for stuff like, features, the, developers' reliance on upscalers, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, even I think ray tracing got thrown in there as well. Then there was a section that I took particular interest in because it's something I talk about at length, which is like platform and, platform longevity, CPU dead ends, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, he touched on skyrocketing demands of things and also the increased power usage of PC components. And just, it sort of went all over the place, the video. And yeah, like I said, there's a few things I want to sort of hone in on. I thought there might be a few things that you could talk about as well, like your thoughts on the features like DLSS. Because really, first of all, I'm trying to work out how we actually work into this discussion, because future-proofing is such a broad term that can mean so many different things to so many different people. Like people like, future-proofing's stupid. You can't future-proof, obviously, because everything becomes obsolete eventually. And I'm not sure that's ever what really like future-proofing meant. I think in my take, let's say, on future-proofing is more that it's a strategy of selecting computer hardware, when we're talking about like PC gaming hardware, that will, last as long as possible. Like there's no obvious shortcoming of the hardware you've selected where you can just see that that's going to be incompatible or have some sort of compatibility or performance related issue sooner than it should, let's say. So that's sort of been my take on it. So it's not like when we had DDR4 memory and pretty much every man and his dog proved that 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory was the sweet spot, perfectly sufficient for 99.9% of all games out there. Recommending 64 gigabytes, let's say, was just stupid and unnecessary for gaming. Like that didn't future-proof your system. It didn't seem likely that in the feasible lifespan of that purchase, you would be able to utilize anywhere near that memory capacity. And that's certainly proven to be true because we have DDR5 now, and as it stands still, the vast majority of games on a system, whether it's clean or otherwise, runs pretty well with 16 gigabytes. 32 is now the sweet spot. 64 is still miles off for, again, 99% of gaming. And then, you have the core debate and all that sort of stuff as well. So, but there are certainly things that you can future-proof that will see your hardware last longer than it would have otherwise. But again, that does depend on use case. Like, a big one we've banged on about a lot is, say, VRAM, advocating for people not to invest in 8 gigabyte cards because, the features that are advertised for the cards in upcoming games, 16 gigabytes we see as being more than minimum if you want to keep the thing for 5 years. But that does depend on the use case of the user. So are you playing esports games, Fortnite with competitive settings, Counter-Strike, Valorant, Apex? If that's the case, then 8 gigabytes is fine. You don't really need a 16 gigabyte card. It becomes a bit irrelevant then. So it's a very nuanced thing. It's difficult to just say this is future-proof, this isn't, because it depends on so many different variables. And that's why it's interesting to discuss, but there are some things that I think are clearly, like, let's say, wrong or just not the case, which I'm sure we'll get into.
I think the other angle with future-proofing that we usually see is, the talk about higher end or more powerful products lasting longer.
Yep.
So sort of the idea that, if you spent more on a 4090, you won't have to upgrade it as often as if you'd bought a 4060, for example. That is obviously the case if you're willing to accept lower and lower quality settings as time goes on. Because it is true that a 4090 will last longer and be more future-proof for loading games, let's say, maybe 7 to 10 years from now, because the 4060 will be just useless. A 4090 is probably going to still run those on some level of quality settings. But usually that ignores that people that buy 4090s are buying them for 4K gaming or ultra settings gaming, and they're not, people that buy that aren't going to accept downgrading the graphics over time. So while it is technically more future proof from a performance standpoint, it's not necessarily future proof for that buyer, for that class of buyer. And so I sort of separate that from the things that you're talking about, which is more of trying to avoid the pitfalls of products that are going to be made obsolete more quickly. So the 8 GB GPUs, obvious pitfall, obvious issues there. And there's been a few of those over time. Whereas I don't think that buying a high-end GPU makes your system more future-proof is necessarily true, even though it is technically true.
It has to be financially viable. Has to make sense, right? Like building a $15,000 gaming PC, which Jensen thinks we all have, that isn't necessarily a smart decision because it's more future-proof than a system that cost half as much. So I guess that's what you're alluding to. Whereas with the 8 GB versus 16 GB cards, if it is a situation where you could spend $50 more to get twice as much VRAM, that I would say is a good future-proofing decision because it's a relatively small investment and you're getting significantly more and a significantly more capable product that should last much longer, especially if you're not just playing Fortnite using low quality settings at 1080p.
Yeah, and I guess there's other examples of similar upgrades you can make within your PC. Power supplies are a big one. It's usually not that much to go from, say, a 500 watt PSU to like 750 or 850 watts. You may only be spending $10 or $20 more. And this is an argument that Jay makes in his video about the increasing power demands of modern GPUs. I think with the power supplies, most people, the sweet spot is going to be applicable for most GPUs. So as long as you're buying, you're not making those not sensible decisions like saving $10 to get a much lower capacity, lower quality power supply. If you get a reasonable one, that is a more future-proof decision, for example.
Yeah, and power requirements haven't really gone up, if we're honest, for like the mid-range typical kind of PC. Like, maybe a little bit, but where they've really gone up is, again, when you're talking about the uber expensive tip of the spear type products like your 5090s and stuff like that. Yeah, power consumption's gone through the roof there. Maybe your 14900K type CPUs. But if you look at more reasonable hardware, even a 9800X 3D is very power efficient. But then the more mid-range GPUs, your 5070 Ti's, 5070s, 9070 XTs, they're much more, I don't know if power efficient is the right term, but they use a lot less power than a 5090. So, and again, if you're buying a 5090, then a power supply becomes pretty much, realistically, all other components in the conversation become irrelevant in terms of whether or not you have to upgrade them and what they cost, because you're talking about a $2,000 US MSRP product that's pretty much always cost more than that, and everything else pales in comparison.
That's right. I mean, I was just looking back at some historical data on power. So the GTX 1070, for example, was a 150 watt product, and that was released, 2016, I believe. The 20 series, we had the RTX 2070 that increased power consumption up to 175 watts, and then it was 215 watts for the super model. And then now with the 50 series, we have the 5070 coming in at 250 watts, the 5060 Ti is 180 watts. So, and I think over that time as well, you would have seen power supplies. Like if you were building a new PC, that you'd probably be getting a more powerful power supply in that sort of sweet spot before things got crazy, like the, spending $10 more eventually gets you a bit more. So, I mean, that's not, like if you had purchased a decent quality power supply for your 1070, for example, which is a 9-year-old product, like that's a long time to be using the same power for. There's a good chance you could use a 5070 in that system. It's 100 watts more. Yeah. Pretty likely that you'll be able to get away with it, unless you really cheaped out back in the day. But certainly with the sweet spot system from back then, I think you'd be okay. So yeah, the power supply, obviously, if you want to go up to a 5090, you're going to have to replace the power supply. However, you're spending like $4,000. So power supply is like $200? I don't know what a 1200 watt power supply costs these days, but a fraction of the cost of a 5090.
Yeah, so I think Jay started out the video basically by saying, once upon a time, I guess he's saying future proofing was a different thing previously because things were upgrading so quickly. So you would upgrade anyway because every upgrade would net you like 50% performance. That would be a pretty typical upgrade. So I don't really get the argument for why future proofing was a thing back then if you had to upgrade so often for your hardware to remain relevant. Whereas now that that's slowed down massively, somehow, like I don't really quite understand the logic there unless I've misunderstood it and you've got a better handle on what he sort of means there compared to, because I think the argument was go back 10 years for the Pascal GeForce 10 series. Each GPU generation, netted you significantly more performance. And the same couldn't really be said for CPUs because that was the quad core stagnation, but let's focus on GPUs. You got a lot more performance each generation. So every few generations, you're talking about massive performance increases, which would, I guess, force you to upgrade. Whereas now it's stagnated much more, especially at the entry level, and it's more features that are tried there. And you can kind of see what's happened, right? Because once upon a time, Nvidia's job was pretty easy. The next process node allowed them to do so much more, and they could get these, performance gains very easily. So they marketed the product on it's this much faster. And it was, there was no trickery required for that. It was that much faster. So people bought it. And then as it became more and more difficult, shrink things down, make them more complicated, we saw the power increase, which is what we sort of talked about, especially at the high end to get those gains, which is why the power usage on the high end has exploded, because that's been required to push performance or continue. It's been required to continue to push performance forward. And then they're seeing the writings on the wall, like it's becoming more and more difficult each generation to provide a tangible performance improvement. So how the hell are they going to get people to upgrade or buy new hardware? And that's where they've pivoted to the software side of things. And that sort of has an advantage of, well, we can do things that our competitors not doing. So that sort of entices people to buy our products, and it entices people to upgrade as well, because ray tracing, upscaling, reflex, all these new software features. So in my opinion, whichever way you want to look at those two things, it's kind of like the same things kind of happening. It's just their way of going about it has changed a bit because of, technological limitations, let's say.
Yeah, I don't think the level of future proofing in GPUs is really any different now than it was back then.
Mm-hmm.
I'd maybe even say that future proofing is better now.
I thought so.
More longevity out of current GPUs. I mean, if you look at how long Nvidia has supported DLSS for the entire RTX GPU stack, it's much better than was the case with previous architectures. And I think one of the points that Jay made was relating to the 1080 Ti. I think he was saying it would last maybe up to 10 years. The product is 10 years old this year, I believe. And I certainly don't think it has lasted that long. I doubt anyone is using a 1080 Ti in modern games. It's pretty outdated, doesn't support modern features, that sort of thing. So I guess I disagree that product has been future-proof in the level that he's sort of claiming. But then even with today's products, again, I feel like for the main features that matter to me, at least the ones I think are the most important, so upscaling being one of those, I think the feature support, it's been pretty good. Like if you bought a 2080 Ti back in the day in 2018, you've gotten every DLSS upscaling update, the new models, everything that NVIDIA's provided since then. I think that's pretty good. Like that's great software support from them. That has certainly been a future-proof product in that sense. Now, the performance isn't, up to the level that it was back then. It's not a high-end competitive card from that sense anymore. But one of the angles that I guess Jay's been going with is the fact that they've been locking, frame generation and stuff like that behind newer architectures and those sorts of things. I don't really think that matters too much. I think a 2080 Ti owner, if you're comfortable with the performance of that, I don't really think there's tons of features that would incentivize you into buying a 40 or 50 series card. Like I don't see frame generation as being that sort of level of feature. If there was like a new amazing DLSS upscaling version that was only on the 50 series, maybe. But the fact that you can still use the old models, and they're slower, I know that, the DLSS 4 doesn't run as well on those cards. But yeah, I think the longevity from that side has actually been really good. So
Yeah, I don't quite understand the argument because it's sort of like what we were talking about with the high-end hardware. Because if you had have bought yourself, a GTX 780 Ti in 2013 for $700 US, which is a lot of money in 2013, and then a few years later, the 1080 Ti comes along. Well, 5 years later, the 1080 Ti comes along. That's significantly faster. It's the same money, not adjusting for inflation, but you're not sitting there going, oh, well, I'll keep gaming on the 780 Ti. I bought a flagship GPU for flagship levels performance. I'm certainly not getting that just 5 years later. It's comparatively very slow compared to a 1080 Ti. So I don't nothing was different back in that period of time. If you're a high end gamer looking at spending, close to $1,000 US on your GPU because you wanted high end performance, you would buy a 1080 Ti. And it's kind of like the same thing, even if you were more in the mid range. If you bought a GTX 1060 6GB, for example, by the time the GeForce 30 series came around, you weren't still, saying this is more than fast enough, I'm going to keep my 6GB. The new cards, even if they were, well, the 30 series was pretty good. It was the sort of cryptocurrency mining and availability that ruined those. But an RTX 3060 was a substantial upgrade. It was a much more powerful product. But again, the example gets a bit messed up there because of demand from cryptocurrency mining. But yeah, I don't quite understand the argument there. If anything, due to what we were talking about, the stagnation with improvements in terms of performance and the more reliance on features, I think that slowed things down. Where if you bought an RTX 3080, for example, that's still quite a usable card today. Again, it's if you're buying it for high-end performance for the $700-800 US price that they were asking back in 2022 or 2020 when it actually first arrived. 6 years later, again, it's kind of like the 780 Ti versus 1080 Ti argument I gave. If you bought a 10 gigabyte 3080 back in September of 2020, you probably would have already looked to upgrade that because, again, you were spending quite a lot of money for high-end performance then, and it's what is it today? It's sort of your
mid-range,
just above entry level.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Is it in the 5060 Ti?
Ti probably, yeah.
Yeah.
With a bit more, 5060 Ti 16 gigabytes probably better. But anyway, I mean, I just feels like you're sort of splitting hairs. It seems like a very similar situation. It's not radically different, where I would say that things have changed significantly there.
There is a point to be made about features being locked to newer architectures, because that can incentivize people to upgrade and make things less future-proof. If there was, each generation, there was these amazing new technologies that were, one was locked to the 30 series, then to the 40, then to the 50 series, that was sort of incentivizing you to upgrade. I just don't really think that's happened. I mean, the only real thing that we can look at and say that's exclusive to the newer architectures is frame generation. And I know Jay was sort of trying to make a point about how frame generation and upscaling is used as, that sort of band-aid to, I guess, make games optimized today. Because games aren't optimized, you have to use these technologies. I don't really think frame generation does that. I think upscaling is now largely required in games, though I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily. I think most people would be using upscaling anyway because of the quality that it produces. So that's a whole separate debate. The whole, are games optimized? Is being forced to use upscaling bad? That's a whole separate thing. But it's kind of like if you bought an Nvidia GPU, an older one, and you did need to use upscaling in modern games, you can do that on a 20 series, 30. You can do that on these relatively old products now. That you're still getting the capabilities of that. And if anything, the only complaint that you'd have really is that the 30 series and 20 series don't run DLSS 4 as well as the newer cards. And that's just hardware innovation. That's not locking features or anything. That's just because the newer models are designed for the newer architectures. So I mean, I guess if there was these cool features that were sort of locking people and incentivizing to upgrade, sure. But I'm just not sure people are buying a 50 series card for multi-frame generation. I think they're buying it for the additional performance that they are getting compared to the older models, not for access to multi-frame gen, especially from the optimization angle, because frame generation doesn't fix that. So yeah, I mean, I think the features thing makes a lot more sense if you're talking about AMD GPUs because of the issues that AMD has had with software backwards compatibility. You know, if we're looking at FSR4, that's only available on 9000 series GPUs. So there is kind of that incentive to upgrade from your AMD GPU to a new one. And we know that's for no reason because there are versions of FSR4 that we've proven to work on older architectures and that it isn't being released for you officially.
Mhm.
So the AMD side, I think, is different in that sense that they haven't provided this long-term support that Nvidia has. And so, yeah, if you did buy, you know, we were talking about the 20 series around that time, there was sort of RDNA 1 and then RDNA 2 along with the 30 series. If you bought those cards, I think it's fair to say that they haven't lasted as long as those models on a features support standpoint. They just you just can't use the latest stuff that AMD is providing on those products. And more recently, there's been this discussion as well about the latest shader model, the latest DirectX features. NVIDIA is providing support back to the 20 series for the vast majority of these features. With AMD, they're only providing support largely for RDNA 4, sometimes RDNA 3, and then older architectures are left without shader model. I think it's 6.9 is the new model that's being available. So from that side of things, maybe has a point with AMD. I don't think he really has too much of a point with NVIDIA. I think the future-proofing side from NVIDIA has been pretty good. But then, you were talking about the 30 series, for example. That card does have some limitations with VRAM and that sort of thing that you might not have gotten on an AMD card. So it's always complicated with the sorts of things. You do have to go relatively high end with NVIDIA cards to get that level of long-term future proofing because other limitations will come into play before now. A 3070, for example, is limited by 8 gigabytes of VRAM in new games despite supporting DLSS4. So
Mhm.
it's hard to weigh up all those sorts of things. But largely on the feature side of things, I would say that the cards are more future-proof now than they were previously. I think these architectures, RDNA 4 now seems to be quite robust for future generations. We'll see how that goes. NVIDIA's proven the RTX architecture has got stuff in it that is quite future-proof. And as you mentioned, the sort of slowing down of hardware advancements and that sort of thing means that people can legitimately use these cards for longer. And as upscaling has gotten better, it's sort of extended that lifespan as well. New models, improving the visual quality, you can use lower modes, get more performance out of them. So all of those things are actually increasing future-proofing.
I mean, again, we're talking about the performance uplift between generations. So going from a 980 Ti to a 1080 Ti, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it was like, I think about a 50% on average performance uplift. I don't know if I have that horribly wrong, but it was over 30%, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I'm looking at tech power-ups, Resident Evil Requiem testing, max preset, 1440p, so no ray tracing or upscaling or anything like that, just native rasterization performance, I believe. The 7900 XT is on par with the 4070 Ti and not much slower than a 9070. So I know that card, was launched at an MSRP of what was it, $900, but it didn't really sell at that. It ended up coming down in price pretty quickly, but it's doing like 126 frames per second at 1440p with the max preset. So sort of speaks to your point. And even the 6900 XT is rendering 102 FPS. That's sort of the same performance as a 7900 GRE. It's faster than a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte by about 15 frames per second. So that's still very usable. Of course, it's a flagship product. And like we said, if you bought a 6900 XT, which was like an RTX 3080, flagship type performance product, you would have already moved on because you don't want that to be like what is now sort of entry level to mid-range performance. So that wasn't future-proofed either. Really, I mean, it still works. So it's future-proof in that sense. It works really well, but it doesn't work as the person who originally purchased it would have intended for it to work, if you know what I mean.
I think the only real issue with the 6900 XT's longevity is, again, the lack of FSR4 support. But like you sort of said, someone who bought that card is probably already considered moving on.
My point is, while that is something that we fixate on, and it's a valid point, the product itself, again, we're Resident Evil Requiem, latest and greatest game. I think people all agree the graphics in that game are really good. Max preset, 1440p, tech power up are claiming 102 FPS on average for the 6900 XT. So I imagine for that style of game, that's highly playable. At 4K, yeah, it drops down to 50 FPS. So probably want to use some form of upscaling there, but highly usable at 1440p, according to Tech Power Up. So again, it's not a situation where it wasn't future-proofed in the sense that it no longer works or it doesn't work to an acceptable degree. I think 102 FPS on average at 1440p using the maximum quality preset is very acceptable performance because it's actually not much slower than an RTX 5070.
Yeah, I mean, the hardware side of things, the longevity is better now. Like that's because of the things you've mentioned, the slowing down of hardware and the slowing down of games as well. Like back 20 years ago, you could go like a couple of years and games would become like unplayable. Like the shader models support and stuff like that, you'd have to upgrade very regularly because of how quickly things became obsolete. And that's just not even from the performance standpoint. It's like the hardware, architectural instruction set, all that sort of thing would become outdated within a few years as new features were being developed. And that is just not the case anymore. Things are slowing down. Hardware lasts for longer, especially if you buy those sorts of higher end cards. But again, that does ignore the whole buyer wouldn't be tolerating that model anymore side of things. But yeah, I mean, back in what was your previous example? Like 780 or 980 to sort of 1080, that sort of era. Within 5 years, you're probably getting like those high-end models were becoming like not very good. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm having a look at I'm looking at Tech Power Up's 1080 Ti review. Battlefield 1 at 1440p. So 980 Ti is doing 74 frames per second, which is, playable. But the new 1080 Ti is doing 133, which is an 80% performance uplift.
Yeah, and that would have been within just a few years as well. Like we were talking, how old's the 6900 XT? That was a 2020 GPU, so it's 5 years coming on 6 years at the end of this year. The 980 Ti to a 1080 Ti was like 3 years? So it's about half the time.
We used to talk about like the fact that the GTX 1070 was easily as fast as a 980 Ti. So you're getting, previous generation flagship performance at the mid-range, and that was common. Like that was to be expected. Whereas these days, that's not a thing at all. Like I know we got the 5070 4090 meme from Jensen, but obviously that wasn't real. So yeah, I mean, one generation with Pascal, we saw flagship to flagship and 80% performance uplift in Battlefield 1. That's the first game I looked at. Like I haven't looked at other games. I don't know what do they do like it depends on how CPU limited the game is, of course. But anyway, that was possible. That's a popular game of the time. But looking through their data, yeah, there's some pretty big gains to be had. And that's why I'm a bit confused by this future-proofing angle, because if you go back 10 years, it was commonplace for a flagship GPU to become a mid-range GPU within one generation. Like it seems like it was much harder to future-proof by spending way more money back then than it is today. Like, for example, if you spent what we would normally say is overcapitalizing, spending too much money on like an RTX 4090, that's actually been a really future-proofed product because it's still the second fastest gaming GPU that you can buy all these years later. So anyway,
yes.
I would argue the opposite is true. I would argue that never before has there been a time where spending what we would recommend you don't spend, which is more money than you planned on spending, can actually, to a degree, future-proof your purchase because you'll be able to enjoy that high-end hardware as high-end hardware for a period of time that was previously not possible.
Today as well, a lot of games are developed to be cross-platform, cross-generation for a lot longer. So we've seen with the PS5 era that many more games were supported on the PS4 up until recently. It was far longer into the cycle that they started releasing those exclusive games that would require the new hardware capabilities, the new memory support, that sort of thing. And so that is extending the life of these products. So when you have sort of the slowing down of the performance improvements, the slowing down of games, so games are not as increasingly demanding as they once were, the support for features that has been better than it's ever been, especially if you get Nvidia GPUs, and the fact that, you know, things like upscaling have gotten better, so you can use them at lower performance level or lower rendering levels, increase your performance as these models improve and time goes on. I think the future proofing of GPUs is better now than it has probably ever been. I think people who have bought reasonable hardware that's avoided some of those obvious pitfalls. So, you know, back in the day, buying like a 4 GB or 6 GB GPU and 8 GB or more was available. Today, buying 8 GB. If you've avoided those sorts of pitfalls, I think you've gotten the most longevity that we've seen for a long time. I mean, the GPU upgrade cycle has changed massively from 2 to 3 year upgrades being sort of the norm that a lot of people would target to now comfortably gaming for 5 years on products, especially from like the mid range and above. Like entry level hardware's always been difficult to get that sort of life out of it, but a lot of those mid range cards are still going pretty strong and have gotten most of the feature support. Again, AMD probably needs to up their game a little bit on that side, but for the rest of it, yeah, the architecture seem to be in a really good position. And I'm not expecting that to change too much either. Like if you think about the position that gaming is in now, what we're sort of expecting for next generation platforms on consoles, which again drive games, I'm not expecting there to be like a radical overhaul of what's being done, that suddenly game developers are going to be immediately making PS6 exclusive games right off the bat, and there's this huge instantaneous step up in demand for games. That doesn't seem to be the way that things are going at the moment. It seems more that developers are trying to target more broad ranges of hardware. They're trying to get the user base, the potential install base to be as large as possible, because that's the best way to recoup the massive investments that they're making in games. So if that continues, and yeah, optimization is obviously always this big talking point, but it seems that developers are trying their best to make sure that games can run on as many generations of hardware as they can so that they get money from it. I mean, that just makes sense. That's the way a business normally works. Try and sell your product to as many people as you possibly can, and limiting games to the very latest stuff is just not the way that it works anymore. Like that's just not a successful strategy. So yeah, on the GPU side, I think I disagree, but then he did make some points about CPUs as well. So did you have any thoughts on sort of the future-proofing side of CPUs? Is that dead for gaming PCs?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll hone in on specifically the point that Jay raised, because I found the CPU argument particularly bizarre because he targeted AM4 with this, which I found really odd. But in that section as well, Jay kind of threw me as well. I got very confused because Jay said he got through all the video. I think this was about the 10-minute-ish mark, maybe 10 minutes, 30 seconds, somewhere around there, I forget. But I've been watching the video all the way up to this point, and then Jay said, he basically came clean. He's like, well, future-proofing's a lie. It's always been a lie. There's no such thing as future-proof, which had me scratching my head given the title of the video. But I was like, okay, Jay, go on. And he was like, your system's going to become obsolete at some point, which I totally agree with. Again, I don't really think the whole future-proofing concept is about that, because I don't think anyone's ever claimed that if you buy or use this specific thing, your system will never become obsolete at some point. So I think that doesn't need to be said. It's more about buying one product over another product for a small, let's say, investment. And you do that because it will last longer for given reasons or whatever. But the example he gave kind of blew my mind a bit, because he claimed that Intel did it kind of right, which, first of all, when he mentioned Intel and future-proofing, that kind of caught my attention, given everything we've talked about. But he said Intel gave you the ability with the 12th generation, 13th generation, and 14th generation, which is kind of funny because 14th generation was just a refresh, the ability to utilize either DDR4 or DDR5 memory, which he says was kind of nice. It allowed you to keep your DDR4 memory, providing more longevity and lifespan to your system, were his words. AMD didn't do that. They had a hard cutoff and required DDR5. So he's trying to argue that by giving the flexibility of DDR4 or DDR5, that improved the lifespan of the platform. But there wasn't motherboards that allowed you to support both. You couldn't use both simultaneously, and it was a new platform. So if you're buying a 12th gen CPU, let's say, you are required to purchase not just the CPU, but also the motherboard. So the fact that you can port your existing DDR4 memory, which is probably slow DDR4 memory from an older platform, it's probably lower capacity. 16 gigabytes would make sense because buying more than that was kind of a waste of money. And you were also limiting the performance even upon release compared to DDR5. And as it stands today, DDR5 is substantially faster than DDR4, even with like the Core i9 parts. I recently did some updated Core i9 1200K testing, which you'll see on the channel soon. It's on average almost 20% faster in modern games using DDR5 opposed to DDR4. And this is using sort of premium memory for both standards. So if you wanted to improve the lifespan, especially for gaming, of your 12th gen investment, you would get DDR5 memory, and the motherboard costs were much the same. The reason why Intel did support both memory standards upon release was because they went first. So they released their DDR5 support before, well, they were the first ones to do that mainstream, which meant there wasn't much DDR5 supply. Kind of a chicken and egg situation, though, I guess. So LJ 1700 released with DDR5 support. There wasn't really DDR5 memory on the market. The DDR5 memory that was on the market wasn't very mature, didn't run at the speeds that we have available today, and it cost stupid amounts of money, much like DDR5 today. So if LJ 1700 had have released with only DDR5 memory support, it would have been a bit of a disaster for the 12th gen, which probably would have had a knock-on effect for 13th gen. So they were kind of forced into this situation. Well, they really were forced into this situation where they had to support DDR4 memory if they wanted to see, anyone really adopt the platform. But it was really kind of a trap because you weren't getting anywhere near the full benefit of the CPUs. But I suppose depending on at what point you bought in and what you were coming from, having more limited performance with DDR4 was still a big upgrade and might have saved you some memory. But really, the better upgrade, which sort of goes against what Jay was saying, was the upgrade to AM5, because AMD sort of, either by Intel going first and AMD waiting, or whatever, however you want to sort of phrase it, AMD released AM5 at the right time when DDR5 memory started to come down. Like, it happened pretty much at the arrival of AM5, which meant that jumping on AM5, wasn't too much of a big deal going from AM4 because, the memory prices weren't ridiculous. So that was just down to a timing thing. But the whole AM4 example is really weird as well, given that that's without a question the best supported platform we've seen in modern times. Like, it's the GOAT of CPU platforms was AM5. Like, you got so many generations, as we just saw over the last almost 10 years. The biggest performance uplift we've seen from one flagship to another flagship from Intel was 15%, whereas from AMD it was like 125%. And yeah, they were coming from a bit back to begin with, but then they ended up ahead. So it doesn't really matter. The performance uplift, even if you want to keep things relative, was still like 100%.
Yeah, it's a weird example. With CPU longevity, I mean, I guess he was sort of trying to say that, I mean, the only real point that he had there, right, was the memory, being able to take your memory over on the Intel platform. And so you had better DDR4 longevity, I guess.
But you
on
had
Intel.
no platform longevity, so it didn't make sense.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the CPU side of things, I've never really seen it as having longevity issues. There a lot of platforms that people bought into. There's the upgrade angle. I'm thinking more of the performance side of things. Most CPU generations have lasted a pretty decent amount of time in terms of gaming performance. Obviously, the latest and greatest stuff has always been better, but CPUs have historically lasted a lot longer than GPUs.
To jump in quickly to support what you're saying, if you pair the 12900K with DDR5 7200 memory, which not all chips do, by the way, but mine does, if you pair it with that extremely premium DDR5 memory, it is slightly slower than a 5800X 3D using DDR4 3600 in today's games overall.
Yeah, and that's capable.
So the 5800X 3D and the 1200K deliver the same gaming performance as long as you pair the 1200K with DDR5. If you pair it with DDR4, it ends up like slower.
So the title of Jay's video is Future Proofing is no longer possible. Here's why. And I feel like using CPUs as any sort of example here is, just strange from the fact that CPU performance, even if you bought like a dead platform or one of the things that we haven't recommended for whatever reason, lack of upgradability or whatever the case is, it's been pretty rare to find a platform where you haven't gotten good performance longevity out of your CPU. Mm-hmm. Like usually they last a reasonably long amount of time. You have to upgrade your GPU more regularly than your CPU. So from that side of things, there's been all these things. There's all this stagnation and whatever, and it's all still led you to have reasonable longevity.
Well, that's the primary argument against platform longevity, is that CPUs last so long that most people don't get to take advantage of platform longevity.
That's right. So I see CPUs as, there's been duds and all that sort of thing, but I think on the whole, you get good longevity out of a CPU purchase, especially if you make the most optimal buys. Like a 5800 XUD is still a very capable CPU for today's games.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, it's not the most powerful CPU. It doesn't give you 9800 XUD level performance, but it is very capable, especially if you're pairing it with mid-range. Like if you're a mid-range buyer, you've bought a 5800 XUD, great longevity. That CPU has lasted a long time.
It's roughly equal to a Ryzen 7 7700X. It's very much equal to a Core Ultra 9 285K. Is anyone saying that you can't use the Core Ultra 9 285K for gaming? I would still describe that CPU as a high-end gaming CPU.
That's right. So, not having longevity, I think we would need to have seen more like an acceleration in game CPU demands with much more stagnation in CPU performance. That would have created this issue where you'd have to upgrade a lot more regularly your CPUs, and that would throw up all those issues with, or at least bring them more into light, lack of platform support for certain platforms and that sort of thing. But I think overall, if we're talking about like, is it not possible to buy a PC today that's going to last you for a long time and so is not future-proof? I just don't think that's the case on the CPU side of things at all. I think most people buying, if you bought a new platform today, probably AM5, probably a reasonably powerful version of those CPUs, that's going to last you a fair while. If you'd bought into AM4, a lot of those CPUs, again, either you got the upgradability to the 5800 XUD or you just got one to begin with. And even if that was on a dead platform, which was kind of his point, right, was like, if you'd bought late into AM4 and then wanted to upgrade again, you had to completely replace the motherboard memory. But everyone knew that
going into AM4. It wasn't like people were like, there's no AM5s on a new socket? What? Or sorry, Zen 4s on AM5? Like it's...
Even ignoring if people knew or not, if you had bought a 5800 XUD, you have gotten longevity from the sense that the CPU is still quite powerful for today's gaming.
And to speak to your point about CPU performance and sort of the stagnation, from the 8700K, which is released in 2017, to the 14900K, which was released in 2023, so it's like a 6-year gap, we saw roughly an 80% performance uplift when CPU limited in games. So we're talking RTX 5090 1080p medium, right?
Yep.
80% across the 6 years. So that's a big performance uplift, but it's also quite a large period in time where we're talking about seeing almost that kind of performance uplift once upon a time from one GPU generation to the next, not a 6-year gap.
I guess there's sort of angles where you can sort of go, well, if you jump into a generation at the wrong time, you are going to lack platform longevity in the sense of being able to upgrade your CPU. But that's always really been the case. There are more optimal times and less optimal times to get platform longevity. Sometimes each brand has different longevity that they've offered at different times.
Mhm.
So that is not something where I would say platform like PC gaming longevity, future proofing is dead because you could accidentally get into a generation at the wrong time and not have any CPU upgradability. I don't really see that as a long-term or ongoing issue.
I guess the main takeaway, the main point here is that if we dissect the last 20 years of CPU support and platform support, it has never been better than what we just witnessed on AM4 and potentially are going to currently experience on AM5 and maybe the Nova Lake generational spawn. Because we had, as I just said, massive stagnation, not just in CPU performance, but also support. Like we were seeing Intel releasing the same socket again with no forwards or backwards compatibility. They were just breaking compatibility for seemingly no reason. And that used to be the norm. So that situation's only gotten better. So future-proofing on the CPU side today is better than it's really ever been. Because even when AMD used to offer broad platform compatibility, it was with CPUs that were irrelevant. It was with CPUs that no one wanted to buy. They managed to do it with AM4 for the first time on a relevant platform with CPUs people actually wanted to buy because they could compete with Intel CPUs to varying degrees throughout the various generations. But that was the situation there. So again, even if future-proofing, it's a weird argument to have because it's largely open to interpretation as to what is future-proofing and what isn't. But if you wanted to make the future-proofing argument on the CPU front, it's certainly not dead today compared to any time previously. It's without question better than it's ever been. So I think that's the main point I wanted to make on that one.
Yeah, I think in summary, if I had to sort of look at all of PC gaming, PC hardware, and whether or not, like, what's the status of future proofing as an overall sort of summary, having now talked through with you a lot of these things, I think it's probably in the best position for longevity and future proofing that we have been in ever, maybe. I'm not 100% sure, a long, long time ago. But if I think about everything with how games are working, the hardware, the advancements in hardware, features, CPUs, everything, even the other components, things like the power supplies, which was part of Jay's video, I think, yeah, we're actually in a really good position for being able to buy a PC today and have it last a long period of time. I think that is much more likely to occur now than in previous generations, previous years.
Yeah, and I think the masses are now better educated on what future-proofing really is than they ever have been. Because if you look at the whole Ryzen generation from 2017 up till about now, there was so much confusion around future-proofing for gaming about how many CPU cores you needed, how much RAM you needed, all that sort of stuff. And now VRAM's crept into the discussion because we've got to a point where that's stagnated for so long that it's actually become an issue for the first time and as long as I can remember. But, for so long, people were concerned about how many cores you needed for gaming. And again, don't want to point to the edge cases. I'm talking about the 99% of all games. We've proven time and time again that a modern 6-core processor works perfectly well. 8 cores is really the sweet spot. And then going beyond that is pretty much unnecessary again for the vast majority of games. So there's not this discussion about, should I buy the 5800X 3D or should I get the 5950, which was a discussion that was had for a while. Plenty of people argue that the Ryzen 9 parts would age much better because they have, the additional cores. Very clear that was wrong and that's not happening. And again, throwing more RAM at games, again, the 99% of games going from 32 gigabytes up to 64 or more is unnecessary. Now, there are simulators and specifically modded games and things like that, where that, the outliers where that may not be the case. But again, for 99% of all games, that is the case. And look, you can argue the same thing with VRAM for 99% of games. 8 gigabytes is fine. It does depend on quality settings and quite a few things, but we're thinking more future-proof with that angle. Again, we're seeing more and more examples as time goes on where 8 gigabyte cards are coming problematic, even at like 1080p resolutions. And it's because 8 gigabyte GPUs over the generations have become more and more powerful. But there's so much to that discussion, which we've talked about before. Whereas if we recommend 32 gigabytes of DDR5 memory, we're doing so in the knowledge or the expectation that for the lifespan of your DDR5 memory kit, you're not going to need a 64 gigabyte DDR5 kit. By the time you need 64 gigabytes, you'll be moving to DDR6, for example. So, and that's what we saw with DDR4. For the lifespan of DDR4, 16 gigabyte kits were fine. You're not really buying DDR4 anymore, though. You know what I mean. So, we've probably talked about this topic for long enough, Tim. But didn't want to, like, it's not really a rip into Jay and whatever and saying go hate Jay. It's really Jay's opinion on this and how he's seen things play out. And I was watching his video and I was thinking, gee, having done this job now for probably like 25 years or something like that, my take on it is very different to Jay's. Like the way I've seen all this play out, and I think I've been paying pretty close attention to stuff like CPUs and GPUs. Yeah, I have a completely different take. And I thought, given that you've been covering all of these features in extreme depth and very closely, it'd be interesting to get your take on how you think, that they've influenced the future-proofing angle. But, Jay's, that was his opinion. His video was well received. So, a lot of people obviously agree with his opinion on all of this stuff. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter. I don't think Jay's opinion on this changes like buying advice or his reviews or anything. It's just, that's his opinion. And we gave our opinion. Who's right, who's wrong? Don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys. Obviously, there's going to be people who agree with us, people who disagree with us. But you've heard our side of it, so you know where we stand on the future-proofing thing. So I think it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about our boring lives. All right, we're back. And for the first time this year, we had some rain, which was lovely. Probably you've had a bit more rain than I have throughout this year, but my garden was dry coming in the last couple of months, even this whole year. Suddenly things are starting to get a lot more green and things are starting to grow, which means I have to, this weekend, fire up the mower for the first time in quite a while. Otherwise, I would have just been mowing dust and dirt. But this weekend, the mower will be getting some action. So, yeah, it's nice. Rain, the garden was suffering, I'll say. The garden was suffering a bit. Now things are looking a little bit better. So, yeah, mower time this weekend, do a bit of pruning and that sort of thing. We'll get the garden a bit back in action. But, yeah, it's been pretty hot and dry this year. So, yeah, it was nice to see a bit of proper soaking into the old lawns this week. Similar out your way, I'm guessing. You're a bit greener usually, but
a little bit greener than where you are. But it is remarkable. It always surprises me every single year how quickly things turn around with a couple of showers, and you go from the dust and whatever in the backyard to it's turning green, and I might have to start mowing again. That's exciting. So I was actually thinking the same thing. I was like, I might get the mower out this weekend, and so Tim and I'll both be having fun zipping around on our mowers. And a lot of the guys were very interested and enjoyed my conversation about my trenching tool, where I laid a trench and then put some cable in it. They thought that was very entertaining. But no, that went well. And because I haven't covered the trench back in yet, so I'm still installing some stuff in it. But the trench goes all the way down to my dam, which was sort of the goal of it. And it was really cool getting to watch, because the water's now fed into the trench. Eventually it would erode over time, but I've got plenty of time to get the rest of the drainage done there. But so the water did run down the trench and was channeled into the dam, and that actually helped clean out the bottom of it as well. But yes, that was cool to see that happen. I wouldn't mind a bit of a heavier downpour to really clean it out. But yeah, the trench is moist now. So everyone's going to be
Nice.
super happy to hear about that, I imagine, in the comments. I can't wait to read everyone's comments about that. And yeah, soon it'll have greenness, but not yet. So it's sort
Nice.
of, it's on the periphery.
It was interesting to see the feedback as well from last week's AI episode, seeing all the comments from people who, yeah, it was interesting to get a few different perspectives of people as well who had tried AI for their specific work or whatever, and hearing about how they were running into similar issues to us and sort of the way that, you know, AI wasn't being super effective for them. I think, you know, I mentioned in the episode about how my understanding was that AI was quite useful for coding, but then we got some people in the comments sort of maybe suggesting it wasn't as useful as I was thinking for coding tools.
Conflicting reports for sure.
Yeah, definitely some more conflicting reports on that side of things. And yeah, just I felt like, and I continue to feel like this a little bit, that I'm kind of maybe taking crazy pills when I'm using these tools and they're just not working the way that I want them to work or they've been advertised to work. Meanwhile, you know, the hype people are sort of getting up and continuing to sort of talk about how amazing these things are, and just that it was nice to hear from people in the comments as well that they were sort of feeling these same feelings, or sort of like that disconnect between what has been talked about, what it can actually do, and how crazy it is.
Yeah, I have a bit of a theory on that, Tim, but it makes me sound a bit arrogant. So
Sure,
I don't really give that opinion, just because, you know, I don't want to trigger the more sensitive people. But I'm wondering if it's a situation where I don't even know how to put this into words, but there are varying degrees of quality of work people do, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're less picky about the quality of your work and you just want to have some work done, then having a thing that spits out some work for you very quickly is ideal. But if you want that work to be quite meticulous, have no mistakes, be highly accurate, and you don't want to have to waste time fact checking it or whatever, it's easy to just do it yourself. I don't know. Do you sort of get what I'm getting at? Like, I think maybe.
Yeah, like there's definitely, I mean, of course, just this is the reality of human life, isn't it? There are people of different capability levels, and that's fine. And some people, I guess the way that it's worked in some cases is, you know, there are people that do a level of work that's maybe of lower quality, and then someone has to, you know, do the finishing touches or improve it. And that, you know, that's how things work, right? I feel like there is definitely some frustration from people that are usually on the fixing end of that side of things, who are sort of maybe putting projects together, finalizing things, who normally would have relied on a worker to do maybe a fairly average or mediocre job, and that's just accepted. You get people doing these jobs, you try and make it work at the end. You know, if those people are now relying on AI and are doing things at an even worse level, if you're just the person supplying your mediocre work to someone else, you know, it doesn't really matter if you then switch to using AI, because you're just continuing to create your mediocre output or whatever. But then the person has to deal with it at the end of the day now is complaining more about having to deal with that, because they're the person that's always been in that position of needing to make things come together. And now it's being made harder by that sort of mediocre worker, as I put it, degrading their output even further from where it was previously.
Yeah. Well, there's like the Pareto principle, which is a thing, you know, the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the output is done by 20% of the input people. And yeah, I have quite a few friends who work corporate jobs, and I hear a lot of interesting stories. Some of them are project managers and manage various different groups of people. And that principle is definitely a thing based on what they tell me. So I don't know. I'm not sure if we're hearing from, you know, the 80%, and then it's the 20% that are like, yeah, it's not that great and doesn't do a super good job. Not sure.
I'm not a great coder. I can do sort of like a little bit of coding stuff, but the ability to have a tool that can just generate code very quickly, you know, for someone of my, I would describe it as bad to terrible level of coding ability, you know, as objectively bad code worker. Like if I was doing that job, I'd be bad at that job. to have an AI that could do it better than I can do it, great. I'm not saying the output that the AI would make would be suitable to be used, but I'm just saying the output from me doing that same task would be so much worse that it's, it is an improvement from that sense. And that applies to lots and lots of different fields.
Yeah, I think I'll just leave it as it can be a useful tool, but it's massively underdelivered so far on what was promised. And I don't think largely what was promised was even possible to begin with. That was just used to generate hype, investment, all that sort of stuff to, I don't know. I never understand the point of lying about something for investment if you know it's not true.
Seems to work.
Yeah, but ultimately, I guess I'm just thinking about it from my perspective. Like, I would want to deliver on the promise. Like, I wouldn't lie to you about something that I'm able to do in the hope that maybe that will buy me time to learn how to do it. But then I would have to, I'd be misunderstanding what was within my capabilities. If you know what I mean. Like, some of the things that were promised that these large language models could do were not things that large language models were ever able to do. Like, it would be the job of a true artificial intelligence, which, they're not making. So anyway, whatever.
Yeah, I just find it wild that people continue to take at face value the statements that people at companies make, not just from AI, but a lot of companies. Just the ability that people have to lie in investment standpoints, it seemingly have there's no real impact or consequence. So I'm saying, like, obviously you're sort of saying, like, I wouldn't do that because I take pride in my work. That's basically what you're suggesting.
Also, I'm not delusional and think that if I lie about this and that buys me X amount of time, I'll be able to do this seemingly impossible thing and pull it off.
Yeah, I guess I'm just sort of saying that, like, it seems that the way of the world these days is that you can lie, you can just make up crap and then use it for investment money, and that's the whole way of things. Like, that is a successful way that you can make a business today, is you can just make up crap, especially if you're following a trend. You can just make up some crap and get investment money, and then you're set.
Well,
it doesn't matter if you can't deliver.
But what happens if OpenAI doesn't deliver?
You just move on to the next trend of the day and you do the exact same thing with that trend at that time.
I guess as an individual you do. And that sort of goes. Yeah, okay.
So with that thing, that's why I find it so bizarre that you've seen that cycle so many times of people hop on a trend, they just make up some crap that is not feasible, is just designed to get investment money. It's part of the whole bubble ecosystem, blah, 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 and they just move from one bubble to the next bubble. Why are people still believing at face value what companies say, or company executives, or people in these meetings? Like, why are people still getting sucked in by what they...
So what you're saying is, like, if OpenAI goes under, it doesn't live up to any of the hype and they ultimately fail and other models surpass them and they just become irrelevant. So essentially you and I would say that Sam Altman failed in multiple different ways there, but OpenAI will fold or be absorbed and he'll just reappear in some other, let's say, grift in the future, and people will ignore his past failings and he'll be able to do it again by just talking a whole lot of nonsense and convincing people of some fantasy.
I mean, that's exactly what Mark Zuckerberg did with Meta, right? They were all in on the not blockchain, it was the metaverse stuff, right?
Yeah.
And now they're all in on AI. So I mean, this thing happens with companies.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it so bizarre that, like, I mean, I know how like this is how things work these days, but just you see those people who report on AI companies who are like sort of looking at, the financial side of things, and they're giving investment advice, and they're just like fully believing every single thing that the companies say in investment meetings, where they say, like, the new model is going to be so much more capable, like and this is just reported at face value with no fact checking of any kind. There's no critical thinking. It's just regurgitated like that. And this feeds this whole ecosystem of, it's not just the reporters, it then feeds down to like the people on social media, the people who are, I guess, eventually using the tools, who are just to believe whatever is being said by these company executives, which is just it's crazy to me that people are still doing this today. Like, you should not believe what they are saying. You should apply some critical thinking to what is being said.
Yeah, it's the complete opposite to how we conduct ourselves and how most of our industry, but certainly ourselves, have operated. Like, we'll see all these amazing claims and we'll hear these internal reports and they'll be suggesting these things that these products are going to achieve. And, people will even see the leaks or the rumors and they'll ask us, what do you guys think about this? And you and I are like, well, sounds good, but we'll reserve judgment until we've actually got it and benchmarked it for ourselves, which is why you and I have never really commented too much or got too involved in the whole rumor mill thing. We'd rather just get the actual product and tell you the facts rather than risk like hyping it up. And we've seen over the years, like, the various hype things that, I mean, remember your famous like Zen 2 thing, I think it was, where you said the pricing and claim specifications don't make sense, and that caused a massive drama that went all the way up to Computex and stuff, and then it turned out you were right. And it's fine to get excited about, rumors or leaked information or whatever, but to take it as gospel's crazy. And I guess that's exactly what you're saying.
It's kind of like the investment money is always justified based on effectively rumors. Like it's all about the potential future valuation of the companies, what they can do in the future. So they're basically having to make up rumors about themselves of what they'll be able to achieve in the future to justify the investment.
Yeah, it's like if everyone purchased the RTX 5070 because Jensen said it was a 4090. So if like nobody looked at reviews or any actual real world data and just like Jensen said it's a 4090, that seems really good, I'm going to buy one. I'm sure some people did that, but hopefully the vast majority of people didn't.
Anyway, we'll end this podcast here because we don't want to get into too much of an AI discussion again. Try to stick to the other topics at times, but whoops. Anyway, thanks for listening to this podcast. As always, we do have the Patreon version if you want an ad-free version. You can sign up, get access to that and many other cool things. Our Discord community that we talked about, people love to bring up videos for us to talk about and other topics. But yeah, thanks for listening and we'll see you next week.